insisting, right? The investor is insisting simply because he or she wants to make sure that the authorized, the issued, there are no contingent events or based on which stock will be issued. I quite frankly, when we work on behalf of startups, we go back to the investor and say, boss, that's fine. I understand your concern. Your concern is that you want an appropriate number of shares so that on a percentage basis, your holding is say 10% on a fully diluted thing. You tell us what, we want to put a 7.5% ESOP program. I will provide for it. And I will, when I'm computing the number of shares to be issued to you, that we will take the dilutive impact of the 7.5% ESOP pool before we determine your numbers.
Okay, thank you.
I saw some question about RSUs. Okay, now again, RSUs, NASDAQ listed company to Indian employees in a wholly owned subsidiary. I'm sorry, again, US law, not Indian law. And so therefore completely outside the scope of today's discussion, right? Because the valuation rules in the US, the valuation rules in the US are very, very different. You have to use Black-Scholes and various other things, Dwaraknath, and really, well outside the competence of a small Indian lawyer like me.
Is the trust requires to be registered in Karnataka? Because as I understand, there is no requirement from the law point of view. The trust requires to be registered.
See, Shivdat, I am a fan of ensuring that you reduce the number of variables in the system, right? If you have an unregistered trust, and for some reason there's a question about it, the fact that it is unregistered will be used in litigation to drag things out. So I am of the view that you should not use trust. Okay, and I know, having been Infosys' general counsel, I know some of the issues that having a trust creates. I'm not at liberty to talk about them, but I can tell you that it is not a very efficient structure. And I also know some of the reasons why Infosys used a trust structure. All the things I can't go into. Try and avoid it. If you're not going to avoid it, register it, because when people who are looking at your company come and say, if I'm a lawyer for an investor or a potential acquirer, I get much more comfort from a registered trust deed than I get from an unregistered trust deed, because in an unregistered trust deed, I'm wondering whether what has happened in the background, what are the potential issues. So again, for me, from a legal perspective and from a lawyer's perspective, a trust is a pain, something I don't want to handle.
On the flip side of it, that I'm getting into a financial side of it, I think it makes sense to have a trust rather than that accounting side of it to that allocation of shares or allotment of shares directly from the company. So that is why most of the companies, because I also handle two trusts, Biocon as well as Yokogawa. That from that side it makes sense for to have
see, there are accounting benefits. See, understand, for company of the size and scale of Biocon, managing the compliances issue with a trust and manage, so that my concern is more for young companies that don't know how to manage anything other than the technology stack, right? In a young company, so in a company like Biocon, for example, Biocon is extremely unlikely to be a takeover target, right? And therefore, if you have issued stock sitting in a trust which is meant for further issuance as options, not a real problem. And with very robust corporate governance structures and compliance structures, not a problem. For companies that are young and not very sophisticated, so you have to figure out what is the appropriate solution for the type of company you're dealing with. I'm not advocating a one size fits all. Absolutely not. Right? And I'm telling you, there will be situations even in young companies where you have to put a trust in place. But in a young company, if there is a choice, better not to put is my personal view.
Okay.
Ravi, I think Shrikant Kabra wants to ask a few questions.
Your Raj Kamal Sarogi, you have.
Yeah. My question is, if there is a company which have got a registered trust of ESOP and the company is going into liquidation, it may be voluntary liquidation also. So in that case, what will happen to the balance available with the trust? Secondly, and what is the exit option for the trust?
I really don't know is the answer, sir. And one of the reasons why you should not put a trust in place, one more reason why you should not put a trust in place, simply because when you're doing a voluntary liquidation, the trust is a shareholder in the company, right?
Yeah.
So suddenly you've got issued and paid up capital that has really no mabab. It's sitting there for the benefit of employees. The company is going into voluntary liquidation. This is one more complication to deal with. I don't know, see, because it's a irrevocable trust, right? You may not want to pay the money. The only place you can do is the money has to be paid out to employees, right? The only beneficiaries of the trust are employees.
In that case, suppose that company doesn't have any more employee because the business has been wound up. So in that case, can't the board of directors of the company and the shareholders of the company can revoke the trust, or they can go to the NCLT and get the order for the winding of the trust as well.
Sir, an irrevocable trust by its nature is not revocable. No, that's a problem. This damn thing is an irrevocable trust.
So, I got your point, but still there must be some way that
you are assuming that there is logical connection between the various laws. In India, you and I have all experienced that one law will say one thing, another law will say another thing, and uske beech mein milana aapka janjat hai, kisi aur ka janjat nahi.
I'd like to draw a story from the mythology that in case of Bhishma Pitama, he has got the Bardhan that he will not be he have unlimited life. But still he has been given a death by the
exit option tha, sir, because of Amba becoming wo to that, sir, God's kid in India. We have created so many structures which are not reconciled with each other. The same ministry may create different structures which are not reconciled, right? And so the question I have for you is, do you want to be the test case who goes before NCLT to argue that an irrevocable trust must be wound up and the cash returned to existing shareholders or to creditors because this money has no purpose? The essential purpose of the trust, which is for the benefit of employees, is frustrated because there are no employees in the company. Which is my point. Which is my point that people have to think very carefully before. So there are pros of setting up a trust from the accounting perspective. There are negatives for setting up a trust when some of these other scenarios play out.
I'm an insolvency professional as well, along with the valuer. Suppose any company comes with for the voluntary liquidation for the purpose of winding up. So in that case, and that company is having the ESOP trust as well. So what should be the way out? That is why I wanted to discuss.
In the comments, I'm seeing Mr. Ganesh Ramani saying that trust cannot go to NCLT under voluntary liquidation. So,
no, that I agree. And, we do not go, but the parent company. I don't know.
So Mr. Adarsh Sharma, no, I think Adarsh Sharma has an answer for Mr. Sarogi. Can we give Mr. Sharma a chance? I'm happy to learn from. See, this is why I hate trusts.
Yeah.
Hey, good evening. I'm sorry I'm jumping the protocol actually, but Mr. Sarogi, you handled this issue already. In fact, the trust is a shareholder in the company once.
Yeah.
Now, in the case of a liquidation of a company, the cancellation of the capital automatically means that the trust as a shareholder will also get wiped out of the share capital of the company. having been wiped out, the trust structure of basically on the asset side of the trust automatically implies that there is no share or there is no asset left on the structures. Of whatever share already allotted to the employees per se, those employees automatically become the shareholders of the company. The balance left once that there is on the asset side of the trust basically reduced to zero. You can then apply to the requisite administrator, if there is, for example, the Bombay Trust Act or the Indian Trust Act per se, and ask them to actually wind up the trust. There is no concept of a trust becoming from an irrevocable to a revocable. However, in these structures where there is nothing left on the asset side of the trust per se, because the trust has nothing. The only thing that the trust will have will be the shares. The shares are now cancelled. The value of the shares. The trust may have in the interim maybe benefited out of some dividends. They might have some bank balance if they given dividends in the previous structures, and if that dividend structure is also reduced to a negatory or zero, practically not negatory, zero, then in that eventuality, on the asset side being at zero, please apply under the Indian Trust Act, and if I recall, it is section 39. Go ahead, do that, apply, and actually get the trust to basically lie on the bed. This is the methodology to do it.
Yeah, I'm highly obliged for your suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so there's employees exercise the vested shares after leaving the company. So I'm sorry, I'm only looking at the latest comments. So now that's a great question, right? Most stock option plans have a period, a grace period between the time that an employee leaves the company and the time that the option lapses, right? So there are two distinctions to be drawn here. One is whether vesting is possible, and the second is what happens to already vested. So I know somebody who lost a lot of money because he decided to put papers in on the assuming that vesting would not be impacted by the notice period. Unfortunately for him, the ESOP plan said the person has to be an employee on the date of vesting, and employee included there was an exception saying that people who are serving notice period will not be counted as employees. So the wording of the plan is very critical in determining whether if there is a pending vesting. Now let's assume all shares are vested or some shares are vested. There is typically a grace period allowed somewhere between 1 month, 3 months, 6 months post leaving when you can still exercise. So if the plan permits it, and that is within the ambit of the company. The company, very often my clients will say somewhere between 3 and 6 months post leaving in order to exercise, especially for private companies where liquidity is an issue, right? So in a private company where there is no ready liquidity in the stock, there are tax implications and liquidity implications for somebody exercising and buying stock which has no ready market. So there are two parts. One, typically we provide for an unlimited exercise period. Say once it is vested, as long as you're an employee, you can exercise at any point in time. So that is typically to allow people to exercise only when there is liquidity on the horizon. And if you leave, you get between 3 and 6 months. If you want to exercise, you exercise. If you don't want to exercise, the option will lapse.
I think Narendra has some questions. I have unmuted him. Narendra, you can ask a question.
Some of them were answered, but anyway, you're referring to me only now, Ravi?
Yes.
Yeah. Just some quick information. So what is the maximum amount of ESOPs that can be issued in a year as per Companies Act? Is there a restriction or there isn't?
Okay, now so there is a restriction on the maximum that can be issued to any 1%, any one person in a year, right?
But not to the total.
No, but again, but as long as the shareholders are okay, as long as the shareholders have approved the allocation, there is no express bar on what the size of an ESOP program can
It
right?
could be as much as, say, 50% of current.
Again, Mr. Narendra, the question is why will shareholders be so the check in, so there's an automatic check and balance that you need to convince shareholders that they should put 50% of, they should agree to be diluted down to 50%.
Okay. Second question was, I've seen certain companies, and this is more MNCs. I'm not sure about Indian companies, where the treasury buys shares of the company and then uses it for these ESOP when they have to deliver the, when it vests and exercise the right.
So there are different options. So in the US, there's something called a cashless option exercise, where essentially, but it's for a public company where there's a ready market, or whether there's a market for it. Essentially, the stock is sold and you don't pay the exercise. So in India, you have to pay the exercise price, get the stock, and then you have to sell it, right? In the US, it was possible to just say, I want to do a cashless exercise. Only the net proceeds of the exercise, that is the difference between the sale price and the exercise price, is paid to you as your proceeds. Now, this concept of treasury buying and selling, that is not available in India to the best of my knowledge, because that is not a trust. See, if a company buys back its shares, that's a reduction in share capital. Yeah. There is no this concept of treasury stock which is held somewhere. These are all, there are a lot more flexible structures available, especially under Delaware law, than is available under Indian law. It's an ongoing thing for us that we would like for the Indian regulators to permit us to use, give us more flexibility. Why not give stock options to independent directors? Somebody said nominee directors. Nominee directors are also not eligible for, because nominee directors are serving as, they're technically not full-time directors.
Okay. Kaushik?
I have a question on on an ESOP document. Is there any specific restriction by law to state that it should be issued to all the employees, or it can be devised to issue to a set of particular employees?
There is no express requirement that everybody should get. There is no that is up to the plan to state so this is where the administrator. So typically the plan says the administrator will decide who is eligible.
So it can be as simple as to one employee also, to who is.
Yeah, but again, understand that there is a restriction on the amount of stock options you can issue to one employee in a year, right? And so there is I need to check the rules once more, but I believe it's 1% not more than 1%.
So if the company plans to give 10%, it is not possible to a single.
It is not. No, it's not. You have to distribute it over 10 years.
Okay, so vesting period. Over a period of 10 years.
No, vesting will be over a period of minimum 11 years, right? Because the 10th year grant, the earliest it will come is in the 11th year. So typically you'll have, and it will not be, and again, question will be, again, why go through all this expense? There are other easier ways of doing these things. Like, for example, a share warrant program where you get a warrant to buy. See, ideally, we would like the flexibility under Indian law, but currently it's not available. But you can choose whether to give it to a group of employees or everybody. A lot of stock option programs are not broad-based, or they have some elements which are broad-based and some elements which are performance-based or restricted to upper management. Because like I explained at the top of my talk, right? Equity is the single most expensive form of compensation. So you want to make sure that you're using it appropriately to attract and retain the right talent as opposed to everybody. If you use a 80-20 rule, then 80% of the stock option goes to 20% of the employees.
Correct. So then also a follow-up question on that. Can the existing shares from a promoter set of group or the existing other shareholders, those shares be transferred in the form of ESOP, or it should be a fresh?
You will have to give it to, that is the question we discussed with Shivdat, which is essentially, if existing shares are to be used, you have to transfer it to a trust, and the trust can then issue it as ESOP.
So there is no way without a trust in the transfer?
No, because without a trust, it's a secondary transfer of shares between two private shareholders.
So it will become a normal share transfer than an ESOP?
it's in its essence, it's just an SH4 transfer.
Correct. Okay. Fine. Thank you.
So you can put a structure in place. So just Kaushik, just to answer your thing, you can put a structure in place whereby the promoter will transfer subject to certain conditions being met. But it's a contract. It's not an ESOP.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Hello, sir. Naveen this side.
Yes, Naveen.
My question is, you just said that nominee directors are not eligible for ESOP. But I think under statute, they are not debarred anywhere. I've seen many companies, even listed companies also, which provide ESOPs to the nominee directors of the investors. So is there any statutory guidelines which specifically debars them?
No. So the guidelines say independent directors are barred.
Yes.
Okay, now, so you're saying a nominee director is not an independent director, he or she is a nominee. Yes. That is a fairly adventurous interpretation. And jab tak chalega, tab tak chalega, then, if somebody challenges it, this whole thing may come crashing down on its head.
Nominee directors are never an independent director. Nominee directors cannot be treated as independent. Independent director has to be independent. No, because nominee directors have got the indirect interest in the company, so they cannot be independent directors.
Okay, so let me take a step back. Okay? So you're right. That is the correct interpretation from a directorship perspective. But understand that the Section 62 was drafted to provide stock compensation to people who work in the company full time, not being promoters. Okay, so that was I'm not saying right or wrong, right? Which is why employees and whole-time directors who are not promoters or independent directors. That was the original concept. Now this what we are trying to do is fit in nominee directors as a sort of intermediate category, saying it's not independent director, not whole-time director, but because there is no express bar, we will give it, right? You can do it provided. But understand that there is a spirit versus letter of the law issue here, and at some point this will get litigated, and there is if you had to ask me to place a probability, I would say there's a very good probability that will get struck down as being not in the spirit of the law.
Okay, thanks, sir.
Sir, Srikant Kabra here. I have two questions. First, whether there is any provision in the income tax which regulates the company as well as the employee for any tax implication?
I'm going to defer this to Ibrahim because he's the man. But certainly, yes, there is income tax implications. Like I said, Infosys versus Commissioner Income Tax is the seminal case on taxation pre the law being amended. So now there's perquisite tax and all sorts of things. But I'm not a tax practitioner. I know that there are tax implications. I also know what those generally look like, but I don't want to give you bad advice. So Abraham, if you want to step in.
I think that, Sam, like this, there are a few questions on accounting and income tax, which is not in the scope of today's discussion. What we'll do is, we will take those up and try to answer them separately by way of those questions we'll answer separately, Sam.
No, I also, don't you have a tax session as part of this series?
We've not specifically done a tax session, but we have, what we did was we did valuation, then we did legal, then we are going to have issues related to valuation, and the last one will be the valuation report.
Okay.
Income tax was not the purview because we wanted to come up with a valuation report, not the taxation. But we'll try to answer these questions by using some of the experts on our panel. So for instance, we have Uttam Padiwal. We'll probably ask him to answer these questions offline.
Yeah, so I can see Mr. Padiwal sort of, in the chat. Mr. Padiwal, so your question about made eligible cannot be a vesting condition. It is better to do it. So vesting condition is actually typically only time-based. Okay, so efflux of time is typically the only condition that is put for vesting. If you are an employee, as on a particular date, a particular tranche of shares of options will vest. Now, if you're saying that you must also be of a particular category of employment, that is not typical. What the administrator typically does is that they will determine that only certain categories will get that stock, and then they will issue options or they will grant options only to those categories. It is not typically used as a vesting condition. I have not seen it. I have not seen it. It's not a bar, but again, employees. So let me put it this way: if I was an employee and I got a condition which said I must be promoted to senior manager in order to get my options, I'll say that is fully within your control, right? So typically, as an employee receiving options, I want to know that I have control over the vesting condition, and the only real term I have control over is how long I stay employed with the company.
Sir, my second question is related to the restricted stock unit, which is quite normal in the US-based companies. Okay, so I would like to understand whether similar kind of provisions are in India, like we have for ESOP, or in India.
So short answer is RSUs are possible in India. I know that public companies have looked at it. I'm not very familiar with the RSU. I mean, actually, let me put it this way. I've not looked at an RSU plan in many, many years. And I have quite forgotten the thing, simply because, so an RSU, the magic of an RSU is really the fact that I don't pay any money for exercise, right? Even in a public company, I can get an RSU for zero.
Yes.
Right. So I get full upside, right? So you would think that it is possible. It is possible. It is possible, but very complicated by Indian law, and therefore not very popular. The companies have looked at it and said, boss, it is a headache to manage, much easier to manage just cash compensation or a long-term bonus program, which is simpler to use.
So right now there's no specific provision to cover it, the various Companies Act and income tax as well as FEMA, which allow.
So I think the big problem is taxation. Essentially around and at the heart of taxation is the valuation and the cost, essentially the compensation cost attached to an RSU. Right. So there is an RSU. Abraham, again, one more thing that you probably want to take up is this whole thing of how the compensation cost comes and sits on a company's balance sheet and has impact on the valuation of the company itself, and what it means from a corporate tax perspective and an individual tax perspective.
Yeah, sure, Sam.
Thank you, sir.
But what we'll do is that in our last session, when we do the valuation report, we'll cover the accounting cost, which is taken by the company. As far as the taxation is concerned at a high level, I think that we'll try to get questions answered. There are also quite a few knowledgeable people on this session itself. We will ask some of them to come up with a few suggestions on taxation because it looks like it's a demand from many. Okay, let's move on to the next person.
Jivika?
Sir, I have a question. You said that in case of startups where the few employees have joined early, the company can go for accelerated vesting. So my question is, can in a single scheme, they provide different vesting periods for different employees? Is it allowed?
Yes. You can have the administrator can have different vesting periods for different programs, different issuances of stock options. Different grants can have different vesting periods.
The same scheme?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So the scheme, let's understand, the scheme is adopted, you're adopting a stock option plan, right? So it's a mota plan. It says one of the things we say in that plan is the administrator can decide to have multiple schemes. So what you're calling a scheme, what I'm calling a scheme, or is essentially what? So say for these 15 employees, there's a separate scheme with an accelerated or with a front-loaded vesting. And there may be another separate option plan or scheme which is for everybody, which says 25, 25, 25, 25, or 10, 20, 30, 40. Jo bhi. You can, but that flexibility is given to the administrator inside the plan. Okay, we have time for one last question, I think.
Sam, there were a lot of repeated questions from Bhuvaneshwari, I think, Bhuvana, on FEMA compliances in relation to, suppose stocks are granted to an employee who is located overseas. When he exercises, what are the FEMA compliances to be looked out
So
for?
there is a specific set of, hang on, let me just pull up the PPT. So the FEMA, so there is under the consolidated FDI policy of 2017, there are FEMA rules that apply to this, which you basically can go and look at it. It must be, so the key principles, Abraham, is that it must be in compliance with the FDI sectoral caps and the rules that apply to Indian beneficiaries.
Okay.
Right? So those are two primary things, because it's an inflow of capital into the thing. So really, in terms of that, it's essentially a foreign investment in an Indian company.
Right. So I think that while we have some more questions,
I'm happy to take, if the call will not cut, I'm happy to take 2-3 more questions.
Yeah, sure. But while we wait for those questions and for people to put up their hands for the questions, let me just
So
ask
I
you.
saw somebody on phantom stock options. So phantom stock options possible. There is no legal framework because it's essentially a contractual arrangement where so a phantom stock is essentially I'm agreeing to pay somebody the increase in value between the price on a particular day and the price on a future date, right? And therefore, it's a contractual arrangement. There is nothing that prevents a company from doing it with the permission of the relevant shareholders, if there's any shareholder. So in private companies, typically investors will have approval rights over these things, but there is nothing that prevents you from having a phantom stock program.
Right. Can I just request, Sam, that a lot of people have asked for the presentation to be shared. So we hope that you'll be able to send that to us so that we can share the presentation.
Yeah, it's a not very great presentation. It's very sort of high level, but happy to share it with you.
Yeah, so that's one thing. And the second is that we'd just like to tell if you can request some of the questions which we did not answer, Sam, if we'll send that across, if you can get somebody from your office to just pen in a few answers and send it to us, we will share it with all the participants.
Sure.
Because
if there's any major question, any major sort of, if it's on a sector or on a topic which we haven't touched at all, they're happy to do that.
Yeah, so that'll be good. And let me just tell the participants also that the questions from the previous session, which were answered by Anjan Babu, we will be sharing those answers also. So the volatility related questions, etc., will also get shared. It has been done by Anjan. He's anyway coming on board tomorrow, and we will also try to send the questions with the answers given by him. Similarly, Sam, if your answers from your team come up, we'll just try to share it with all the participants, because it's been actually quite enlightening to have to this call.
I'm hopeful that I know that there's a very large subject, and I've sort of skimmed over a bunch of things. I've told you some things I don't know. It's not necessary that we have answers to everything, especially around like the winding up of a trust is something that I've not had to deal with.
Right. So can I request Ravi to look at?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Now I request Jeevika Poddar to summarize and give a vote of thanks to Samuel, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Ravi, sir. It is my privilege today to propose a vote of thanks to our learned speaker, Mr. Samuel Mani. I, on behalf of Bangalore Valuers Association and all the participants present today, propose a formal vote of thanks to you, sir, for such a wonderful session and for taking us through the legal framework of ESOP in India. Sir, you mentioned that equity is the is the most expensive compensation, and the promoters must understand the value of ESOP, and we couldn't agree more. Today we also learned one important thing, that if a company, mainly startup, wants to give ESOP to its promoters, then it should first apply for a startup recognition with DPIIT, and then they can go ahead with the issue of ESOP to their promoters. Also, one very common question which comes to our mind when we are dealing with ESOP is which route to suggest to our clients, ESOP direct route or the trust route. So you very beautifully explained that's the difference between both the routes, and I'm very sure that now we can advise our clients more efficiently about which route to choose. Then today's session had actually a lot of takeaways. So thank you once again, sir, for your lucid presentation and your detailed deliberation and taking out your valuable time for all of us. I would also like to mention special thanks to Bangalore Valuers Association and the entire team for organizing this 4-day workshop on this very important topic. So thank you everyone, and have a good night.